Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're taking a close look at Ohio, and I have to tell you, the Buckeye State just might be one of the most unusual places in America when it comes to local legends and unexplained mysteries. We've got giant snakes going after kids, a mummy that drew visitors for 35 years, strange creatures with oversized heads hiding in the forests, and an anonymous letter campaign that scared an entire community. And that's only scratching the surface. Before we jump in, I'd really like to know something. If you're in the United States, what state are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Maybe you actually call Ohio home and get to see these mysteries up close. I'd really enjoy hearing what you have to say in the comments. This video is meant to keep you company for the next hour or so. Something you can unwind to, have on while you work, or even fall asleep to as we make our way through Ohio's weirdest tales. So get cozy, make yourself comfortable, and let's jump into some truly odd folklore together. Chapter 1. The Crosswick Serpent. Let's kick things off with one of the scariest stories from Ohio's early days, the Crosswick Serpent. This story brings us back to May of 1882, to a tiny little place called Crosswick, just outside of Waynesville in Warren County. These days, Crosswick is hardly even on the map. It's really just a handful of homes spread out along the road. But back in 1882, this quiet little spot became the setting for one of the strangest animal encounters in Ohio's history. So, here's what went down. One spring afternoon, two young brothers named Ed and Joe Lynch, ages 13 and 11, were doing what kids did back then, fishing in a small creek called Caesar's Creek. Now, picture this. You're just sitting there with your brother, probably having a good time, and out of nowhere, you hear this odd rustling sound coming from the tall grass behind you. You spin around, and what you see is absolutely nightmare fuel, described as a huge snake or lizard, somewhere between 12 and 30 feet long, depending on who you ask, though most accounts land around 12 feet. This thing was black and white, with yellow spots, had 4 thick legs, with feet about a foot wide, a head that was 16 inches across, and a long forked tongue. Basically, it looked like something that should have died out millions of years ago. Now, most kids in this situation would take off running, and they did try, but here's where it gets really awful. The creature was quick, incredibly quick, and it caught Ed. According to the stories, this monster grabbed the 13-year-old boy in what some reports call its mouth, and others describe as its arms. The details get a little unclear here, but it started dragging him toward a huge hollow sycamore tree about 100 yards off. Joe was screaming at the top of his lungs, naturally, and, thank goodness, there were some men working nearby. 3 men heard the commotion and came running over: Reverend Jacob Horn, George Peterson, and Alan Jordan. All 3 of them saw the creature with their own eyes. This is key because we're not just talking about a couple of frightened kids making things up. 3 grown adults, including a reverend, laid eyes on this thing. When the men got there, the creature still had Ed and was trying to pull him into the hollow tree, which looked like its home. The men showing up scared the creature enough that it finally let go of the boy and hurried deeper into the tree. One of the men scooped up Ed and brought him somewhere safe, while the others ran to Waynesville to get Dr. Elsie L. Corns. Now, while the doctor was looking after Ed, who was badly bruised, scratched up, and shaken, but alive, the 3 men did what any group of frontiermen would do. They gathered a posse, and I'm not talking about a handful of guys with pitchforks. According to newspaper reports from back then, somewhere between 30 and 60 men showed up carrying axes, clubs, hunting dogs, pretty much anything they could grab. They marched to that sycamore tree, ready to fight whatever demon had just attacked a child. Here's where the story gets even stranger. The posse started chopping at the tree with their axes, thinking the creature would come running out the hole at the bottom. But this thing was smarter than that. Instead, it jumped out from a hole near the top of the tree, landed on the ground. And here's the part that still sends shivers down my spine. It stood up on its back legs, balanced itself with its tail, and took off running like a racehorse across the creek. Some men dove out of its way. Others chased after it with their dogs. The creature ran up a small hill, leaped over a fence, and disappeared into a hole under a large rocky ledge about a mile north. Some reports say they even tried to blast the cave entrance with dynamite to trap it inside, though whether that really happened is up for debate. So, what was this thing? Well, researchers have spent years trying to figure that out. The descriptions most closely match a monitor lizard, maybe something like a Komodo dragon or an Australian peyote. But here's the issue. Monitor lizards don't live in Ohio. they never have. And even the biggest monitor lizards only grow to about 8 or 10 feet, not the 12 to 30 feet that witnesses described. Plus, monitor lizards can't really stand and run on their hind legs the way this creature did. Some people think it might have been an escaped pet or circus animal. Back in the 1880s, traveling shows sometimes had exotic animals, and maybe one got loose. But would a tropical lizard make it through an Ohio winter? Probably not. What makes this story especially interesting is the large number of believable witnesses. We're talking about a doctor who treated the injured boy and could describe his injuries, a reverend, multiple farmers and workers, and dozens of men who joined the hunt. The local paper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, even wrote about it on May 29, 1882. Newspapers back then had to be careful about their reputation. They couldn't just run any wild story without checking facts, or they'd lose trust fast. And here's a detail that really makes you think. The Crosswick monster was seen near Caesars Creek, which flows right into the Little Miami River. Fast forward 90 years to 1972, and police officers reported seeing another large, reptile-like creature in the Little Miami River, just 24 miles downstream. That creature became known as the Loveland Frogman. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe there's something about these waterways that we don't understand. The Crosswick monster was never seen again after that day in 1882. Either it died in that cave, found its way back to wherever it came from, or maybe, just maybe, it's still out there in some forgotten corner of Ohio's underground river systems. Whatever the truth is, the people of Crosswick certainly believed they ran into something real that day. And the terror on Ed Lynch's face, as he almost became a monster's dinner, was very, very real. Chapter 2, Sabina's Mummy. Alright, from giant lizards to dead bodies, and trust me, this next story is one of the oddest things I've ever looked into. Let me ask you something. If a stranger passed away in your town, what would the authorities do with a body nowadays? They'd probably take pictures, run DNA tests, maybe put a photo on the news, and then bury the person after about 30 days, right? Well, the people of Sabina, Ohio, had a very different approach back in 1929. They decided to just keep the body on display for 35 years. This is the story of Eugene the Mummy, and honestly, it's both sad and completely bizarre. On a hot day in early June 1929, an African-American man was spotted walking through Sabina, Ohio. He seemed very sick, hunched over, barely able to walk. People who saw him said he would occasionally nod or wave, but he clearly wasn't doing well. He made it to the edge of town, near the intersection of 3C Highway and Borum Road, and that's where he collapsed into a ditch and died, probably from natural causes or illness. The next day, a farmer found the body and called the local funeral director, a man named Littleton. Littleton took the body back to his funeral home, the Littleton Funeral Home, and looked it over. The man appeared to be somewhere between 40 and 80 years old. Counts differ. There were no signs of injury or violence. He'd simply passed away, probably from exhaustion and whatever sickness had been bothering him. Now, here's where things get interesting. The only clue to this man's identity was a small scrap of paper in his pocket with an address written on it, 1118 Yale Avenue in Cincinnati. The local authorities got in touch with Cincinnati police and asked them to check it out. They did, and guess what? It was an empty lot, just a piece of land with nothing on it. The police asked around the neighborhood, and the man who lived closest to that empty lot happened to be named Eugene Johnson. So, with no other leads, the authorities decided to call the dead man Eugene. The name stuck. Normally, what happens next is you photograph the body, hold it for 30 days in case someone comes to identify it, and then you bury it in a potter's grave. But Littleton and the people of Sabina had another idea. They embalmed Eugene, dressed him in a nice suit, and put him on display in a small brick shed right next to the funeral home, near a bus stop. The thinking was simple. If people could see him, maybe someone would recognize him and claim the body. 30 days passed. No one came. But did they bury him? Nope. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years, and Eugene just kept sitting there in that little brick shed, perfectly embalmed, becoming more and more mummified as time went on. Now, you might think people would be horrified by this. Who wants to see a dead body casually displayed in a shed? But apparently, the people of Sabina grew rather fond of their unusual resident. They started calling him their town mascot. He had a couch to rest on. The funeral home staff would dust him off regularly and change his clothes when they got dirty. He even had a little visitor's book where people would sign in to say they'd seen him. word spread about Eugene. People from nearby towns started making special trips to Sabina just to see the mummy man. Buses traveling between Columbus and Cincinnati would stop in Sabina to give passengers a chance to stretch their legs and visit Eugene. In 1946, Eugene became such a popular attraction that Littleton actually took him on tours to local festivals, including the famous Circleville Pumpkin Show. Over the 35 years he was on display, it's estimated that 1.5 million people viewed Eugene's body. But here's where it gets darker. Eugene became a target for pranks, especially by local high school and college students. Kids would steal him, move him around, or leave him in weird places. His gold teeth were stolen at some point. Sometimes he'd show up on people's porches on Halloween as a joke. And honestly, while some of this might seem like harmless kid stuff, it's actually pretty disturbing when you think about it. This was a real human being who deserved respect and a proper burial. The final straw came in 1964. Some college students thought it would be funny to steal Eugene, take him all the way to the Ohio State University campus in Columbus, and leave him sitting on a bench on High Street in the middle of the night. Can you imagine being the student who found that? The next morning the authorities called the Littleton funeral home and said something like, "Hey, we found your mummy, want him back?" That incident finally convinced the Littleton family that enough was enough. After 35 years of being a roadside attraction, Eugene needed to be buried. They bought a plot in the Sabina Cemetery, gave him a proper funeral though not many people showed up, and laid him to rest under a large tree. His gravestone is simple. It reads, Eugene, found dead 1929, buried 1964, though there is apparently some disagreement about whether he was actually found in 1928 or 1929. To this day, people visit Eugene's grave. There are always coins left on top of it, a sign that people still remember him and pay their respects. But his story raises so many questions. Who was he really? Where did he come from? Was he looking for work, as people guessed? Did he have family who wondered what happened to him? And maybe most troubling, why did it take 35 years for people to realize that displaying a human body like a carnival attraction was wrong? Eugene's story is a strange mix of small-town hospitality taken too far, a different era's views on death and dignity, and a real mystery that will probably never be solved. Somewhere out there might still be relatives of Eugene who don't even know what happened to their ancestor. DNA testing could potentially solve the mystery now. But, as far as I know, no one has tried to dig up the body for that purpose. So Eugene stays what he's always been, a mystery wrapped in an odd piece of Ohio history, a reminder of a time when death was seen very differently than it is today. Chapter 3. Melonheads of Kirtland. Alright, let's go from the sad and strange to the truly scary. This next story takes us to Lake County, specifically to the woods around Kirtland and Chardon, where one of Ohio's most lasting creature legends hides in the shadows. These beings are called the Melonheads, and their story is part horror movie, part local folklore. So, what exactly are the Melonheads? According to legend, they're small, human-like creatures with unusually large, round heads, hence the name. Descriptions differ, but most accounts describe them as being around 3 to 4 feet tall, with deformed, fluid-swollen skulls. Some say they're hairless, with pale, almost see-through skin. Others mention twisted limbs, sharp teeth, and glowing red eyes. They're usually seen at night, and they're said to be very hostile to strangers who come into their territory in the woods around Wisner Road. Now, every good legend has an origin story, and the Melonheads have several versions, depending on who's telling it. The most common version involves a man named Dr. Crow. The details change, but the basic story goes like this. In one version, Dr. Crow was actually a kind man. He ran an orphanage in the Kirtland area and took in children who suffered from hydrocephalus, a condition that causes fluid to build up in the brain, making the skull swell. Dr. Crow and his wife cared for these children the best they could. But when Mrs. Crow died, the heartbroken doctor struggled to look after the kids alone. Eventually, Dr. Crow himself died, and the orphans were left to fend for themselves. With nowhere else to go, they went into the nearby woods, where they learned to survive by hunting and scavenging. Over time, they became wild, distrustful of strangers, and protective of their space. But there's a darker version of the story that most people tell. In this version, Dr. Crow wasn't a kind caretaker at all. He was a crazy scientist, doing horrible experiments on orphaned children. The story goes that he would inject experimental fluids or venoms into the children's heads, causing their skulls to swell to terrible sizes. He and his wife abused these children badly. Eventually, the children had enough. They planned together, killed Dr. Crow and his wife, burned down the orphanage, and escaped into the woods, where they still roam to this day. There's even a third version that involves government secrets. According to this tale, the government was running top-secret tests on children, probably related to chemical weapons or radiation. When the tests resulted in major head deformities and mental problems, the government quietly moved these children to a facility in Kirtland to be looked after by Dr. Crow. After Dr. Crow's death, the children were left behind, and the government covered up the whole thing. Now, you might be thinking this is just a campfire story to scare teenagers, and maybe it started that way. But here's the thing. People still report seeing the melonheads, even today. The stories are surprisingly similar. Most sightings happen along Wisner Road in Chardon Township and Kirtland, usually at night. One account from a blogger named Jeff B. described how he was 10 years old when he heard his dog barking one night. Around 10 p.m. he ran outside to see what was wrong, and found his dog lying there, bleeding. When he looked toward the woods, he saw what he described as a small figure with very pale skin and a large head. When the creature saw him, it ran into the woods. The next morning, Jeff followed tracks that led to a creek before disappearing. Another account from 2001 comes from a man named Tony, who was driving down Chillicothe Road in Chardon with his family. They were going along at about 45 to 50 miles per hour when they saw something beside the road near an irrigation ditch. Tony described seeing a human-like figure about 4 feet tall, wearing torn brown pants held together with what looked like corn husks and a white shirt covered in brown and red stains. The creature's head was swollen and light brown, with 2 holes on the sides where ears should be and very large eyes. The most disturbing part, it was keeping up with their car, running alongside them at 45 to 50 miles per hour. When they turned a curve, it jumped into the woods. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of these stories. Some are probably made up or exaggerated, sure, but the similarity of the descriptions, the exact location of the sightings, and the real fear in the witnesses' accounts make you wonder. The legend has become such a part of the local culture that filmmaker Eric Mintel made a movie about it called The Melonheads, House of Crow, which came out in 2024. When it premiered, whole theaters sold out. People in Kirtland and Chardon take this legend seriously, whether they actually believe it or not. What's interesting is that the Melonhead legend isn't unique to Ohio. Similar stories exist in Michigan and Connecticut, with some differences. This suggests that the legend might have deeper roots, possibly going back to European folklore about deformed, isolated people who lived in the woods. But let's talk about the logical explanations for a moment. Could the Melonheads be based on real people? Hydrocephalus is a real condition, and in the past, people with major deformities were often hidden away or put in institutions. It's possible that the legend grew from encounters with real individuals who had this condition and lived on the edges of society. That's actually more sad than scary when you think about it. Or could it be a case of mass panic, an urban legend building on itself? Teenagers looking for excitement go driving down dark roads, their imaginations running wild, and they see shadows or animals as something more scary. Whatever the truth, the Melonheads of Kirtland remain one of Ohio's most lasting creature legends. And if you ever find yourself driving down Wisner Road late at night, and you notice something moving in the woods, something with a head just a little too big and eyes that seem to glow in your headlights, well, maybe just keep driving. Don't stop for a selfie with a melonhead. Trust me on that one. Chapter 4, Utopia. From creatures in the woods to a town born from dreams of perfection, let's talk about one of Ohio's oddest ghost towns, Utopia. Now, the name alone should tell you something went very wrong here. Anytime someone names a place Utopia, perfect society, things tend to fall apart pretty spectacularly. And boy, did they ever. Utopia is located on the northern bank of the Ohio River in Claremont County, about 30 miles southeast of Cincinnati. If you visit today, you'll find a handful of houses, a tiny general store, and a lot of creepy ruins and history. But what makes Utopia truly unique is that it was the site of not one, not two, but 3 different utopian experiments, all of which failed and one of which ended in complete disaster. Let's start with the first group. In 1844, followers of French philosopher Charles Fourier started a commune in this location. Fourier believed that society should be set up into what he called phalanxes, self-contained communities where everyone lived together, shared all work equally, and split all profits equally. It was basically an early form of communism, though they wouldn't have called it that. The Fourierists built a large, 30-room shared brick house and many private homes. Families could join the community for $25 a year, which wasn't cheap back then, and in return, they'd get a small house and a plot of land. Everything was supposed to be shared and equal. In theory, it sounded great. In practice, it lasted about 2 years. The problem, as it turns out, is that people are individuals with different wants, work habits, and ideas about how to live. Some people worked hard, others didn't. Some people wanted to keep what they earned. Others resented that attitude. Arguments broke out. Bitterness built up. By 1846, most of the families had left, let down by the whole experiment. The dream of a perfect society had crashed into the reality of human nature. But the story doesn't end there. In 1847, a man named Jonathan Wattles, leader of a group of spiritualists, bought the land and buildings. The spiritualists believed they could talk to the dead and that spirits guided their choices. They moved in with big plans to make the community work where the Fourierists had failed. Now, here's where things get dark. Despite warnings from locals, and this is important, despite warnings, Wattles decided to move the main building, the big community hall, closer to the Ohio River. Brick by brick, his followers took apart the structure and rebuilt it right at the water's edge. They finished the move in early December 1847. The locals apparently kept telling them, "Hey, the river floods, this is a bad idea." But Wattles and his followers believed they were guided by spirits, and the spirits told them it would be fine. On the night of December 13, 1847, just days after finishing the building's move, the spiritualists were holding a dance party in the social hall. Music was playing, people were dancing, everything was great, and then one of the biggest floods of the 19th century hit the Ohio River. The waters rose with terrifying speed. People looked for safety in the very building that had been foolishly moved right next to the river. The quickly rising water destroyed the south wall of the building and swept most of the people inside to their deaths. The exact number varies by account, but somewhere between 17 and 20 people drowned that night. Their bodies were washed down the Ohio River. The few survivors left Utopia immediately. You can hardly blame them, but wait, there's more. The land didn't stay empty. In the 1850s, a man named Josiah Warren, who some call America's first anarchist, tried his own utopian experiment in Utopia. Warren believed in individual rights above all else, no hierarchy, no government control, just people freely coming together. He created a system based on labor. You'd pay for goods and services with time instead of money. It was actually a fascinating idea. But Warren's utopia ran into problems too. The community's exclusivity made it hard to grow, and neighbors from nearby towns weren't exactly welcoming to a bunch of anarchists. By the mid-1850s, most of Warren's followers had given up and moved away, frustrated by their inability to grow the community. So, what's left of Utopia today? Not much physically, but oh, the place has a reputation. There are underground ruins near the river, sometimes called the Underground Church, though they're probably just the basement of one of the old buildings. These ruins are said to be haunted by the ghosts of the spiritualists who drowned in the 1847 flood. Locals and ghost hunters report all kinds of strange events in Utopia, especially on rainy nights. People claim to hear voices, see ghosts, and feel sudden drops in temperature. Some say they've seen dripping wet figures wandering the ruins, the spirits of those who drowned, still looking for a way out of the water. There's an old stone house that still stands, and it, too, is rumored to be haunted. The underground chapel where the spiritualists supposedly held their secret rituals has become a popular spot for ghost hunters and curious teenagers. The place definitely has a creepy atmosphere, whether or not you believe in ghosts. What I find interesting about Utopia is how it represents the American dream of building a perfect society, and how that dream repeatedly failed in the same location. The Fourierists failed because communal living didn't allow for individual human nature. The spiritualists failed because they ignored practical warnings and paid for it with their lives. Warren's anarchists failed because isolation and exclusivity prevented growth. Utopia's story is ultimately a warning tale. It reminds us that building a perfect society is impossible because perfection means something different to everyone. It also reminds us that sometimes, when locals warn you that your building is too close to a river that floods, you should probably listen to them. Spirits or no spirits, Today, Utopia sits quietly along US Route 52, a footnote in history that most people pass by without noticing. But for those who know the story, it stands as a monument to American idealism, human tragedy, and perhaps, just perhaps, restless spirits who still haven't found peace. Chapter 5, Peninsula Python. Alright, from ghost towns to giant snakes, because apparently Ohio had more than one huge serpent problem. This next story takes us to Peninsula, a small town in the Cuyahoga Valley, and it involves an 18-foot python, mass panic, and a legend that's still talked about today. The story begins on June 8, 1944. A farmer named Clarence Mitchell was working his cornfield near Peninsula when he saw something that made him question his sanity. Crawling through his corn was an absolutely massive snake, not just big, but huge. Mitchell guessed it to be about 18 feet long, dark-colored with brownish blotches. This was not a snake that belonged in Ohio. Mitchell did what anyone would do. He got the heck out of there and right away reported what he'd seen. Now, in 1944, people took this kind of thing seriously. A few days later, on June 10th, a couple found what appeared to be snake tracks near the Cuyahoga River. The tracks were described as being as wide as an automobile tire. 2 days after that, on June 12th, another farmer found his chicken coop raided. Several chickens were gone, and there were more of those massive snake tracks. By late June, the whole area was in a panic. A large snake, possibly a python or boa constrictor, was loose in the Cuyahoga Valley. On June 25th, a group of armed men was put together to hunt the creature. They spent several days searching the woods and riverbanks, looking for any sign of this monster snake. What they found was broken branches, disturbed plants, and trails that led to the river, but no snake. More sightings came in through July and into August. A woman named Pauline Hopp reported seeing the snake slithering away from a willow tree in her yard. The sight of it scared her cows so much that they broke loose and ran off. Other residents reported seeing a huge serpent, either in the water or moving through the bushes. So, where did this snake come from? The most common theory at the time was that it had escaped from a circus or traveling show. Remember, this was 1944, and circuses would travel around with exotic animals. It's entirely possible that a truck or train carrying such a snake had an accident in the area, and the creature escaped into the wild. That would certainly explain where an 18-foot python came from. But here's the problem. Pythons are tropical snakes. They need warm temperatures to survive. Ohio has winters cold ones. If a python escaped in June of 1944, it would have had maybe 3 or 4 months before temperatures dropped, and it would likely have died. So, either the snake died that first winter, or there's more to the story. And here's what's amazing. People believed him. Not everyone, obviously, but enough people that he gained a significant following. Sims actually got close, very close to getting government funding for a polar expedition. He asked Congress multiple times during President John Quincy Adams's administration in the 1820s. It looked like funding might actually be approved. Congress was genuinely thinking about giving this man money to sail to Antarctica and look for a giant hole in the earth. But then Adams lost his re-election bid in 1828 to Andrew Jackson, and Jackson quickly killed the idea. No hollow earth expedition for you. The rejection and years of exhausting lecture tours wore Sims down. He retired to Hamilton, Ohio, where his health kept getting worse. On May 29, 1829, John Cleves Sims Jr. died, still believing that the earth was hollow, still sure that he'd been right all along. Sims was buried in what was then Hamilton's Pioneer Cemetery, a place called Ludlow Park. When a new cemetery, Greenwood Cemetery, was built in 1848, most of the bodies from the old cemetery were moved, but Sims's stayed put. His body was never moved. In 1873, Sims's son, America's Sims, decided to put up a monument over his father's grave. And what a monument it is. At the top sits a sphere picture of the hollow earth with a visible hole running through its middle. Below that is a stone base with plaques explaining Sims's theory. The writing includes his famous statement, "I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within." The monument stood alone for many years and became a bit of a tourist spot. People would visit to see this odd memorial to a man with an even order theory. Over time, the monument got damaged. It was shot at, hit with baseball bats, and the globe on top was even stolen in 1882, though it was found in a neighbor's yard. In 1991, the town of Hamilton decided to fix up and protect the monument. They lifted the whole structure onto a new cement column, added new bronze plaques to replace the worn-out writing, and put an iron fence around it. Today, the monument still stands in what's now a playground in Sims Park, surrounded by that fence because, well, it's in a rougher area and vandalism is a worry. The monument has become a quirky piece of Ohio roadside Americana. People visit it, take pictures, and wonder at this leftover from a different era of scientific imagination. Because here's the thing, while we know now that the Earth is not hollow, Sims's theory wasn't completely crazy for his time. It was creative, it tried to explain things he'd seen, and it was shared with real belief. Sims wasn't a trickster. He truly believed what he was saying, and his impact went beyond his own life. One of his followers, Cyrus Teed, changed the hollow Earth theory into an inside-out Earth theory, claiming we actually live on the inside of a hollow sphere. Teed started a religious community based on this idea in Estero, Florida, and there's now a state park named after him. Another follower, Jeremiah Reynolds, actually did manage to get himself on a ship to Antarctica, looking for one of Sims's holes. He didn't find it, obviously, but his trip did add to real scientific exploration of the Antarctic region. The hollow Earth theory has also had a surprising impact on fiction. Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, published in 1864, almost certainly drew ideas from hollow Earth theories. The concept pops up in various forms in science fiction and fantasy, even today. Standing in front of the hollow Earth monument today, you can't help but feel a mix of amusement and respect. Amusement because the theory is clearly wrong, but respect for a man who had a wild idea, chased it with passion, and almost convinced the United States government to fund a polar expedition based on it. The monument serves as a reminder that science moves forward through bold ideas, even wrong ones. It reminds us that curiosity and imagination drove people to explore the unknown long before we had all the answers. And it's a testament to the fact that Ohio embraces its weirdness, keeping a monument to a proven wrong theory, simply because it's part of their history. Chapter 7, Circleville Letters, Unsolved Crime. Alright folks, hold on tight for this next one, because we're diving into one of Ohio's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. This is a story about anonymous letters, threats, accusations, death, and a mystery that's haunted Circleville, Ohio, for nearly 50 years. This is the story of the Circleville letter writer. Circleville is a small town about 25 miles south of Columbus, with a current population of around 14,000 people. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody else's business, or at least they think they do. It's known for its annual pumpkin show, charming downtown, and being a fairly quiet Midwestern community. At least, it was until 1976. In the summer of 1976, a woman named Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver for the West Falls School District, got a letter in the mail. It was postmarked in Columbus, had no return address, and had no signature. The letter accused Mary of having an affair with the school superintendent, Gordon Massey. It was rude, threatening, and frightening. The writer claimed to know where Mary lived, said they'd been watching her house, and knew she had kids. Mary kept the letter to herself at first, hoping it was just a one-time thing. But about a week later, she got another similar letter, and then her husband, Ron Gillespie, got one, too. This letter told Ron that if he didn't stop his wife's affair, which Mary insisted wasn't happening, his life would be in danger. The letters got more threatening. One warned that if Mary didn't admit to the affair, and Ron didn't report it to the school board, the letter writer would spread the claims on CB radios, through posters, on signs, and even on billboards. The letter writer was going to publicly embarrass them. Mary and Ron were terrified. They told 3 people about the letters: Ron's sister, her husband, Paul Freshour, and Paul's sister. And that's when things took a dark turn. August 7, 1977, Ron Gillespie got a phone call at home. According to his children, their father grabbed his gun and left the house, saying he was going to meet the letter writer. Shortly after, Ron's car crashed into a tree. He was found dead behind the wheel, with a blood alcohol level of 0.16%, 1.5 times the legal limit for being drunk. 1 bullet had been fired from his gun, though it didn't hit anyone. The death was ruled an accident, but Ron's family didn't accept that. They insisted Ron wasn't a heavy drinker and that something didn't add up. Was he drunk? If so, why was he forced off the road? And who called him that night? The sheriff at the time, Dwight Radcliffe, at first seemed to agree there might have been foul play, but then changed his story and kept saying it was just an accident. Ron's death didn't stop the letters. In fact, they got worse. Now, The letter writer was accusing Sheriff Radcliffe of hiding a murder. Letters started arriving all over Circleville to different people, accusing them of various wrongdoings, stealing money, domestic violence, affairs. All sorts of personal secrets were being shared by this anonymous writer, who seemed to know everyone's private matters. The letters kept coming for years, hundreds of them. They were postmarked in Columbus, but they targeted people all over central Ohio. The handwriting was careful, the details were frighteningly correct, and the mental torment was huge. The letter writer clearly had deep knowledge of Circleville residents' private lives. Then, on February 7, 1983, things got much worse. Mary Gillespie was driving her school bus route when she saw a sign along the road at the intersection of Duval Road and 5 Points Pike. The sign made a dirty accusation about her daughter. Mary pulled over and went to take it down. As she grabbed the sign, she noticed a piece of string running from the sign to a box. Inside the box was a loaded pistol, set up to fire when the sign was moved. Mary barely escaped injury. If the trap had worked right, she would have been shot, possibly killed. The police looked into the gun and were able to trace the serial number. The gun belonged to Paul Freshour, Ron Gillespie's brother-in-law. Paul's wife, Karen Sue Freshour, who was going through a difficult divorce with Paul, told police that Paul had written the letters. She'd found letters hidden all over their house. Paul denied everything. He claimed the gun had been stolen weeks earlier, but police gave him a lie detector test, which he reportedly failed. Paul Freshour was arrested and charged with attempted murder. In 1984, he was found guilty and sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. Everyone assumed that with Paul locked up, the letters would finally stop. They didn't. Letters kept coming to mailboxes all over central Ohio. They were postmarked in Columbus. Even though Paul was in prison in Lima, Ohio, on the other side of the state, the warden of the prison was so sure that Paul wasn't writing the letters that he put Paul in solitary confinement multiple times and did full investigations. Nothing was found. No proof that Paul was somehow getting letters out. In 1993, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries came to Circleville to look into it. They even got their own threatening letter, warning them not to come. The letter said, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you sickos will pay." Paul Freshour, who had just been let out on parole in 1994, begged the show to reopen the investigation. He kept saying he was innocent until his death in 2012. Here's where it gets complicated. Recent investigations, including one by CBS's 48 Hours in 2024, have found some interesting details. A forensic document expert named Beverly East studied the letters and compared them to Paul's handwriting. She pointed out that the letter G, in both the anonymous letters and Paul's writing, was written in a very unique way, almost like the number 6. East says she's sure Paul wrote at least some of the letters, but other experts disagree. FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole looked at the case and said the mental profile of the letter writer doesn't match Paul's personality. Plus, there's the clear fact that letters kept coming while Paul was in prison under close watch. Some investigators now believe there were multiple letter writers. One theory suggests that Karen Sue Freshour, Paul's ex-wife, wrote some or all of the letters and set up Paul by planting the gun. Others think the school superintendent's son might have been involved. Some even suspect Sheriff Radcliffe himself, noting that the letters were written in a style sometimes used in police reports and that Radcliffe would have had access to information about everyone in town. Here's the truly creepy part. The last known Circleville letter was sent in 1994, the same year Paul Freshour was let out of prison. If Paul didn't write them, did the real writer stop because they'd done what they wanted by ruining Paul's life? Or did they stop because they died? The Circleville letters case stays officially unsolved. We may never know who really wrote those letters or why. What we do know is that for nearly 20 years, an anonymous letter writer terrorized an entire community, ruined lives, possibly caused at least one death, and then disappeared. This case is a scary reminder of how mental warfare can be just as harmful as physical violence. Words on paper destroyed reputations, ended marriages, drove people out of town, and left scars that still haven't healed. Circleville has tried to move on, but the mark of those letters still haunts the town. Chapter 8. The Minerva Monster. Alright, let's end this trip through Ohio's strange folklore with one of the most famous creature sightings in the state's history, the Minerva Monster. This is Ohio's Bigfoot story, and unlike a lot of Bigfoot tales, this one has multiple believable witnesses, police involvement, and records that make it pretty hard to ignore. Minerva is a small town in Stark County, Ohio, population under 4,000 people. It's located in Paris Township, and back in August of 1978, it became the center of one of the most studied Bigfoot incidents in American history. The story centers around the Kittle family. Herbert Kittle, his wife, Evelyn, and their children lived on Lincoln Street, about 2 miles west of Minerva proper. Behind their house was an old abandoned strip mine, basically a large pit that had been dug out decades earlier and left to fill with water and plants. In early August 1978, Herbert Kittle had been clearing some brush near this pit and had thrown some garbage into it. A few nights later, on August 21st, the Kittles' grandchildren and some of their friends were playing outside when they came running into the house, completely terrified. They claimed they'd seen a huge, hairy monster looking through the pit. Now, the adults at first thought the kids were just being dramatic or had seen a bear or a homeless person, but the children were genuinely upset. So that evening, the family kept watch and then they saw it. Multiple members of the Kittle family described seeing a large 2-legged creature covered in dark hair, standing somewhere between 7 and 9 feet tall. The thing had wide shoulders, long arms, and what really bothered everyone were its eyes. The witnesses described the eyes as reddish or glowing when light hit them, the way animal eyes reflect light at night. The creature didn't just show up once. Over the next several nights, it kept coming back. On August 22nd, the family heard loud noises outside. They looked out to see the creature again, this time closer to the house. It appeared to be looking in through their kitchen window. The creature was so close that they could see details: the matted fur, the huge build, the way it moved. Now, here's what sets this case apart from a lot of Bigfoot stories. The Kittles did what you're supposed to do when you see something you can't explain. They called the police. Stark County Sheriff's deputies, including Deputy James Shannon, responded to the calls. The deputies didn't just blow this off as crazy talk. They actually looked into it. They found large 3-toed tracks in the soft ground near the pit. The tracks were huge, much larger than a human foot-tand, not like any known animal in Ohio. Deputy Shannon made plaster copies of some of these footprints. The local paper, the Akron Beacon Journal, sent reporter Barbara Galloway to cover the story. She talked to the family and other witnesses. This wasn't just a case of one isolated family making something up. The story was being taken seriously by law enforcement and media. As word spread, more witnesses came forward. On August 29th, a woman named Pauline Kuhn, who lived nearby, reported seeing what looked like a hairy ape-like creature moving around the strip mine area. On September 8th, a Mrs. Ackerman reported seeing 2 of these creatures near the mine at around 6 p.m. in the evening, not even at night. She watched them for several minutes before they went into the woods. The Kittles' home became a circus, and not in a good way. Hundreds of people showed up, parking on their street, walking on their property, all trying to get a look at the monster. The family had to put up no trespassing signs and fences to keep the crowds away. Some people were friendly and curious. Others were doubtful and mean. The harassment got so bad that when the Kittle family went to a local high school football game, the crowd stood up and started chanting "Bigfoot, Bigfoot" as they came into the stadium. It was embarrassing. Herbert Kittle later said that there were doubters, people who yelled things from car windows when they passed, and it was weird. But he also said that if people didn't want to believe them, they didn't have to. Researchers from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization arrived on September 9th, led by a man named Jim Reyes. He talked to the Kittles and other witnesses, wrote down information about the tracks, and tried to find physical proof. He came back on September 30th for a follow-up look. Over the years, various researchers have spoken again with the Kittle family. What's amazing is that their story never changed. Decades later, family members who saw the creature told the same story, almost word for word. If you're making something up, it's hard to keep the details the same for that long. So, what was the Minerva monster? Well, there are a few ideas. The skeptical explanation is that it was a case of mistaken identity, possibly a bear standing on its back legs, or a large person in dark clothes. But the witnesses insisted this was neither a bear nor a person. The size, the way it moved, the shape, nothing matched. The creature was never photographed or caught, which doubters point to as proof it wasn't real. But lack of proof isn't proof of absence, as they say. The Cuyahoga Valley, where Minerva is located, has thick forests, abandoned strip mines, and plenty of places for a large creature to hide if it wanted to stay away from humans. What makes this case especially interesting is the number of separate witnesses who had nothing to gain by coming forward. The Kittles were harassed and made fun of for their story. Other witnesses faced similar ridicule. These weren't people looking for fame or money. They were regular folks who saw something that scared them and tried to report it. In 2015, filmmaker Seth Breedlove made a documentary called The Minerva Monster that looks into this case in detail. The documentary has interviews with Herb Kittle, who was there during the sightings, Barbara Galloway, the reporter who covered it, and Deputy Shannon, the officer who investigated. The film doesn't try to prove or disprove the existence of Bigfoot. It just shares the story as those who lived it remember it. The Minerva Monster case remains one of the top Bigfoot sightings in Ohio based on believability. When researchers rank Ohio's most believable creature encounters, Minerva is always in the top 3. And here's something interesting. Bigfoot sightings in Ohio aren't rare. The state ranks 4th nationally in recorded Bigfoot encounters, with over 330 reports according to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. Ohio's creature is sometimes called the Grassman, and sightings are most common in the southeastern part of the state, particularly in the Sasquatch Triangle formed by Guernsey, Noble, and Washington counties. So, did the Kittle family really see a Bigfoot in 1978? We'll probably never know for sure. What we do know is that something scared multiple people, left unexplained tracks, and created a legend that's lasted for over 45 years. Whether that something was an unknown primate, a misidentified bear, or something else entirely. The Minerva Monster remains one of Ohio's most enduring mysteries. And there you have it, folks. Ohio's weirdest folklore explained. From the Crosswick serpent attacking children in 1882 to Eugene the Mummy, displayed for 35 years. From the melonheads hiding in the woods around Kirtland to the doomed utopian town that drowned in a flood. We've covered the Peninsula Python, the Hollow Earth Monument, the frightening Circleville letters, and the Minerva Monster. What stands out to me about all these stories is how they show something basic about human nature. We're storytellers. We take real events, unexplained things, and our deepest worries, and we shape them into legends that get passed down through generations. Some of these stories, like the Crosswick serpent and the Minerva Monster, probably have roots in real encounters with something unusual. Others, like the melonheads, might be urban legends built on misunderstanding and fear of the unknown. But whether these stories are true, partly true, or completely made up, they matter because they're part of Ohio's cultural identity. They're the campfire tales that parents tell their kids, the local legends that make a town special, the mysteries that keep us wondering about the world around us. So, the next time you're driving through Ohio, maybe take a detour, visit Eugene's grave in Sabina, drive down Wisner Road in Kirtland at night though, maybe keep your doors locked, check out the Hollow Earth Monument in Hamilton. And if you're feeling really brave, visit Utopia on a rainy night and listen for the voices of those who drowned in 1847. Thanks for watching, everyone.